You're listening to KSDS San Diego, KSDS HD1, and jazz88.org. I'm Dave Drexler, and this is Inside Art. Support for Inside Art comes from the members of San Diego's Jazz 88.3. Tonight on Inside Art, we feature Olelo Performing Arts Company's production about one of the great historical figures in American music. Scott Joplin's new rag, The Life and Times of the King of Ragtime Writers, is actor and playwright Robert Barry Fleming's contemporary meditation on Joplin's historical legacy, a legacy established in the turbulence of the American post-Reconstruction era. Through spoken word, hip-hop, and live ragtime music, Fleming explores the mind and music of this genius who flourished during what was called the Gilded Age, although it only glittered for some. Scott Joplin's new rag runs September 25th through October 12th at the 10th Avenue Arts Center in downtown San Diego. And I'm pleased to welcome the director of this world premiere musical play, George Ye, who's also an assistant professor of theater at Mesa College. George, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Inside Art.
Thank you very much.
Well, how did you come to this project? I
was actually invited to participate through the former artistic director of the olelo theater company, Sima Sueco, and also the creator of the project, Robert Barry Fleming. So they had approached me over a year ago to see if I wanted to participate in the development of it and possible direction of it.
And what did you think when you first saw the script or talked to Robert Barry Fleming yourself?
I was daunted, and I was curious to see what it was going to be, because it was actually a very long script. And because it is a kind of meditation and an examination, and in some ways a deconstructed view of Joplin's possible perspective on his experiences, past, present, and future, it was hard to decipher at first. So, but I like working on new plays, and I've done a lot of work on new plays with organizations like the Playwrights Project and some other new plays with theaters around town. So I was excited about that as a challenge to work with Robert and to help flesh out the inherent voice and what it is he really wanted to say with this play.
And what is it that he wants to say?
That's actually is kind of large, and I think that's pretty, it's still kind of in development, even though we're going to be opening on the 25th. But it's more of an exploration of Scott Joplin. You know, what he wanted to do was to present a one-man performance of Scott Joplin, but he didn't necessarily want to do it in the traditional format where you have one actor on stage who may play multiple characters and then do monologues and go on some kind of, in two-thirds through the performance go through an emotional journey. He wanted to try and slice in a different angle and really dissect and examine not only how Scott Joplin contributed to music and the American culture, but also how it happened.
And what do you think is really fascinating about Joplin's character?
You know, that was something we talked about in rehearsals, that he was kind of a quiet man. He didn't really share a whole lot, and he didn't, as an artist, write massive diatribes or monographs about his experiences and his beliefs on music and what it is. He wrote his music, and he performed his music, but he was kind of a bit of a mystery. He's kind of ephemeral at times, too. So Robert's fleshed out some of his experiences, and he's highlighted them and kind of extrapolated and looked at them from not only Joplin's perspective, but also from a modern optic. For example, earlier in the play, I don't want to give too much away, but on stage we will have a DJ station, and there will be some what's called tutting. Now, back in the 80s, everybody knows about breakdancing, popping and locking, all that kind of stuff. But nowadays there are a lot of youth in the culture that are starting to do a kind of isotonic movement with fingers, and they call it tutting. And sometimes they've got these gloves that have lights on their fingers, and they move that around. So he's kind of engaging that contemporary aesthetic in the performance as well.
And the language, does that kind of move from contemporary to the Gilded Age and back and forth? How does that work?
It does, and you know what? He's engaging us with some poetry, with some rap, with some spoken word, and of course, music. There's a piano that is center stage, and we get to hear some wonderful ragtime.
And he plays it?
Yes, absolutely.
Really? So he's a multifaceted performer?
Yes, and that's what's going to make this play so interesting, I think, that it's not just dialogue-driven, but it's driven by the multiple aesthetics that he's employing. So we have piano, light, movement, spoken word, rap, He's even taking a letter that was written back in 1907, I believe, and he's turned it into a contemporary rap.
And is this all to illustrate how Scott Joplin's music continues to live on, or that it has an afterlife that has influenced all these other forms that have come afterwards?
I think he's doing a lot of different things in different moments in the play. In some ways, he's highlighting the African-American experience, not only in 1907 through Scott Joplin's optic, but also perhaps what it means to be African-American in America and the different experiences that everyone's dealt with. There's even a hint towards what's been going on in Missouri in the play, because that's brought up new discussions in our rehearsals.
And speaking of rehearsals, you guys have been a continent apart, I guess, during much of this, or at quite some distance. And you've kind of done some rehearsals in unique ways, haven't you?
Yeah. So he was here. We did a first read-through. I'll briefly kind of outline a little bit of the process. He was in San Diego for a while, and we did a read-through, and we did some work here, and some rehearsing and meeting, mostly table work, and trying to dissect the play and figure out what pieces to keep, what pieces to cut, what pieces to rewrite. And then when he was done directing a play at Olelo, he had to go back to his job at the arena stage in Washington, D.C. So we were apart, and during that time we had some additional conversations through Skype. So we were talking, of course, about the play. And sometimes he would act out parts or explore the text, and I would watch and we would talk. And then I think at the end of June, I spent a couple weeks out in Washington, D.C., and we rehearsed together at the arena stage. So that was a little bit more intense because we had started to finalize what the script was about and started to put it in space, put it in his body, put it into the piano, and try and figure out what the aesthetics are going to be. And then I had to come back, and he had to go back to his job, and he's been rehearsing on his own, but we've also had regular meetings on Skype again. So it's been a very unique, kind of strange, and for me, a disconnected experience at times, because in the theater we like to be in the same room together, but because of this odd-natured piece, it's been working. So on this end, we're prepping for his arrival, and we've got load-in planned. We're going to use projections and sound and some interesting scenic design by David Werner and such. So it's been a very unique process.
Have you ever directed a one-person performance before?
Definitely not quite like this. You know, I've worked with a lot of different projects and, long monologues within plays, but not quite a singular piece like this that has its own arc.
So what is different for you? What is the big challenge as a director?
I think the changes for me in this particular process is working solo and figuring out which hat to wear at what point, because most everybody who works in theater knows that if you're a director, then of course you're reading a script, interpreting the script, trying to figure out what it is you as the main interpreter want to say with it, so you can convey that information to the designers, to all the production personnel, and to the performers. And working with Robert, who's not only the key performer, but also the playwright, so it's kind of his baby, I had to kind of figure out how we were going to talk, negotiate, and how I was going to be supportive in this particular process. So we discovered that at first, at least for the first half, I would be a dramaturg. So working with him to help cultivate the content of the piece. And then now, in the last few weeks, shifting more into a director's position and also kind of a helping production manage the thing and get it ready here in San Diego.
Are you looking at this as not only a world premiere, but is it still a work in development after that?
I think so. Yeah. And this is across the board, even at the larger companies around town. When somebody opens a new play, it's probably going to continue to be developed. I've worked on a number of shows around town. Recently, one that was at the Playhouse, and it was coming from the Hartford stage, I believe. And it will probably go to another venue, another regional company. So it'll continue to be worked and reworked and reinvented. So I think that's part of the process with new works, especially if it's a first-time opening to an audience in a short run.
I'm speaking with the director of a brand new piece of theater by Olelo Performing Arts Company. It's Scott Joplin's new rag. And I'm speaking with George Ye, who's the director, and also, by the way, an assistant professor of theater at Mesa College. What is happening over at Mesa as far as the theater program?
The theater program's booming. We are working on our first production in the fall, and I'm directing that concurrently with Robert's show. And we are producing a one-act version of Shakespeare's Macbeth.
One act?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, given our rehearsal schedule and the time, it's going to be too difficult to actually try and embrace a full 2-hour production. So we've cut it down, and We're really excited about it. So that's going to be opening October 3rd at the Apollo Theater on the Mesa College campus.
And getting back now to Scott Joplin's new rag, what can you tell us about the story of Scott Joplin as a musical creator?
Well, he originally from Missouri, Sedalia, Missouri, and he also spent some time in Texarkana, Arkansas. And he came across a teacher, a Jewish immigrant named Julius Weiss, who saw that he had talent and skill and gave him some training in classical music. So a lot of people feel it's that classical music training and his own inspirations that gave us his own unique development of ragtime. You know, and he's known as the king of ragtime.
And people would probably know his work from The Entertainer, which is probably the most famous song that people...
Yeah. And what's unique about that is that he worked very hard to articulate himself as a respected, in some ways, classical musician. There's a famous opera that he wrote, that he produced, called Treemonisha. And when I first started working on the piece with Robert, you know, I had heard some of that music, but I didn't know what it was because, of course, I knew about The Entertainer, Maple Leaf Rag, some of the other waltzes. But this particular piece was one that he really wanted to be known for. But at the time it was produced, he was suffering from tertiary syphilis, and his faculties were starting to fall apart. His hands, his mind. And the music itself kind of diminished and disappeared. I think it wasn't until 1940 that there was a group that tried to perform and bring it about, but it still didn't take off. And most people know his music in a contemporary sense from a famous film called The Sting, where it won an Oscar, I believe.
Yeah.
So then, of course, it wasn't necessarily Scott Joplin. It was tied to this other set of images and icons and experiences in modern culture. So part of his journey is being a bit diminished, you know. And I think something that happens in this play is that Robert is actually giving Scott Joplin a voice, not just a voice in terms of a live character on stage, but a voice in terms of his experience, his struggles, and what he had to cope with.
Since Joplin was well known and celebrated in his time, there must have been a conflict because he's a prominent African American in an era where there's still a great deal of racism. And how is this kind of portrayed in the play?
You know, I don't think Robert entirely isolates that discussion to that period. I think what's unique about this play is that Robert is addressing that issue in a timeless fashion. He's looking at it not only in terms of what Scott Joplin had to deal with and struggled with, but what every African American continues to deal with and continues to struggle with. So the messages in the play and the voice of Scott Joplin in the play are kind of timeless when it comes to racism and racial issues in America.
It is a continuum, therefore.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's really going to be the unique voice in the play.
Anything else you'd like us to know about this, what you'd like people to take away from as you present this piece?
It's going to be really unique, very exciting. It's engaging us not only with projections, with movement, with live piano sound, with story and narrative, but it's also going to pose a lot of questions that might challenge the audience. So I don't think it's going to be the most complacent or just easy play to experience. It is going to challenge us.
Oh, it sounds like a fascinating work, though, to see at the 10th Avenue Theater. Scott Joplin's new rag, The Life and Times of the King of Ragtime Writers. And I've been speaking with the director of the piece, George Ye. George, thank you again for joining us on Inside Art. We wish you all the best with this production.
Thank you very much.
Olelo Performing Arts Company presents Scott Joplin's new rag, The Life and Times of the King of Ragtime, September 25th through October 12th at the 10th Avenue Arts Center downtown. For tickets and more information, you can visit Moolelo, that's MOOLELO.net. Coming up, we'll meet the new Executive Artistic Director at Moolelo, Lydia Ford. That's next, as Inside Art continues here on San Diego's Jazz 88.3. Funding for Inside Art comes from the members of Jazz 88.3, where your support brings the joy and history of jazz and all of the arts to San Diego. To become a member, visit jazz88.org/join.